Daniel Haymann, attorney at law at MLL. He advises companies in the cannabis industry. He used to be a commodities trader in Zurich, Singapore and Hong Kong. Then Fabiano Orelli, since 2018, he's been working for the Federal Office of Food Safety, studied biology at ETH Zurich, used to be a lab employee, and at the Federal Food Safety Office, he's in charge of genetically modified food, novel food, and regarding hemp foodstuff, he's also in charge of all relevant questions. And you can, of course, as the audience, also ask questions at the end of this panel. So if you have questions, remember them and ask our panelists. Then Kai-Friedrich Niermann, he's an attorney at law at KFN Plus. And since 2003, he has been an company and corporate attorney, and he's in charge. He is a specialist when it comes to product safety and consumer protection. Sounds very serious. Then Dr. Francis Scanlan, he is the managing director of Cloud9 Switzerland. Cloud9 is a life science company focusing on the development and marketing of pharmaceuticals and foodstuff based on cannabis and hemp. And as you can see, Dr. Francis Scanlan is English speaking. Also, wenn man ihn nicht versteht, bitte auf Kanal 1 wechseln, dort bekommen Sie die deutsche Version. Then, Dr. Miguel Guttentag, he is a member of the management of Guttentag Solutions. Guttentag Solutions is highly specialized in cannabis analytics. He studied chemistry at the University of Zurich, where he also made a PhD, and he has long-standing experience in chemical analytics. And Lukas Brunner, an attorney at Grünkraft, and thanks to his long-standing experience in narcotics law and dealing with regulators and international authority, he's in charge of the official communications with the authorities. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Daniel because I have no words left. Well, thank you very much for this nice introduction, and I am going to try to make this dry topic interesting for as many people as possible. So just briefly, some background information. There are, of course, different uses of cannabis as a foodstuff, and the legal basis for that in Switzerland is the federal law on foodstuffs and utility articles, as well as the relevant ordinances. Then we have the contaminant ordinance and the ordinance on novel food, which is the so-called novel food ordinance in Switzerland. And this states that certain categories of foods need authorization by the authorities. These are hemp extracts containing cannabinoids and also individual parts of that. They are subject to authorization, and such an authorization is ruled out right from the beginning if the THC content is exceeded. There are exemptions, however, for hemp seed oil, hemp seed flour. But basically, when it comes to novel food, the Swiss law takes the EU Novel Food Catalogue as an orientation. And that's why we are asking Kai now. We know that this catalogue has changed over the past few years. Can you give us more information on that, why that was the case? Well, I entered this field in 2017 when Germany legalized medical cannabis and the first CBD products came up in Germany. Nobody really knew what that was. Now we've seen a real hype around these products. And, of course, the legislator also became active in the field. And in 2018, the Novel Food Catalogue was published. And it said more or less, if the CBD content is no higher than in the original plant, it is not a novel food. And that was a rather soft formulation. So is the extract okay, even if it was extracted by whatever extraction means, and if it was between 2.5 and 5%, did you then require authorization, or should the limit be 6%? So that was a rule that the industry could live with. So all normal CBD oils up to 5% could have been covered by that. And if you go up to 10, 20, 30%, of course, you would have had to apply for a novel food exemption. But this would have only been done with the addition of a CBD extract. Yeah. But then Spain in August 2018 started to apply the novel food ordinance on these products. That was the first country to take the CBD products off the shelves, followed by Austria, where in December 2018 an order was published by the health authorities to the districts to really enforce the novel food ordinance. And between December and January, there must have been intensive talks at the European level, because in January 2019, the novel food catalogue was changed so that all extracts were now covered under the novel food entry. So all the cannabinoids. Even though many of them are not even researched and they are not listed individually, they just say, as an example, CBD, THC, CBG, CBN, and other cannabinoids. Also synthetic ones, yes. And as soon as it is an extract, be that a full spectrum or an isolated one, it is seen as novel food. And then the German Office for Food Safety announced that no cases are conceivable according to which a product containing cannabinoids could be marketable. And as a result, this led to increased official measures and police action, and many operating bans were imposed. And the biggest retailer in Germany, DM, had one product on the shelves, which was a bestseller, actually. And then at that moment, the authority noticed, oh, there's something going wrong there, we need to become active. And then they decided to launch the AIA, the authority, that's the European Industrial Hemp Association. Maybe you can tell us more about that. You're the official advisor of AIA. Well, they have been in existence for a longer time, got founded in the 1990s, was mainly in charge of pharmaceutical industry, hemp farmers. But because of this product diversification, all hemp processing companies are now a member of the association. And before this community application, they had about 100 members. Now they have around 300. And a consortium was set up. So this association founded a company, and this company launched this application. They collected around 3 million euros as a budget, and for 4 different product formulations, they have applied for permission or authorization as a novel food. For the CBD isolate, for the full spectrum gold, for full spectrum rund, that's both the carboxylized, but only one of them dexylized, and for product, which is only slightly decarboxylized. And this has been submitted. The first studies have been started, and a big tox study was launched after the second rate was paid by the members. And so now it's clear that financing is secured, and that is really the decisive study now, the tox study on THC, because we have this ARFD, the general reference dose for Europe. This is a non-binding guidance, but the German authorities and laws use this when they evaluate the safety of a foodstuff. And this level is very low. Maybe we can go in detail here later, but this is really the main objective of this application, because if the THC limits are so low, I cannot really market this product. It doesn't make sense. And and this community application, you have to submit that in Europe. So to what extent is that relevant to producers in Switzerland? Fabiano, can you comment on that? Well, if an application is submitted in the EU, it can also be submitted in Switzerland, but EU authorizations are automatically accepted in Switzerland. So depending on the situation, it is well worth submitting another application in Switzerland or not. But it's not the case the other way around. It's only relevant for Switzerland what happens in the EU, but what happens in Switzerland is not really relevant to the EU. Okay, so we've talked about THC now and the contaminants ordinance, these limits. And Miguel, maybe you can tell us something about the background of these threshold values. So why are they so low? That's the first question. Is there a reason for that? And then, are they adequate? Well, the threshold values, where the absolute values come from is not really clear. But they were calculated based on the amount that you will consume of this product. So, for instance, for pasta, you have a threshold value based on the typical amount of pasta that you would consume. So can you give us an example so that the normal people here in the audience, understand that better? Yes, I've got it in front of me. So for pasta, 2 ppm, 2 milligram THC per milligram of pasta is allowed. And spirits, 5 milligrams per liters. Alcohol-containing beverages, even lower, 0.2 milligrams per kilogram. So this is incredibly low, these values, similar to Germany, which is actually on the same level as a ban. You cannot really produce a product with such threshold values. And in addition to that, for CBD droplets, as they are consumed or used these days, that doesn't fit any of these categories, because all these categories are for 100 gram, 1 deciliter consumed, and not 2 to 3 droplets, which might only be a few milligrams. So a typical CBD oil, let's say with 12% or 18%, how much THC is in there? 0.5%, 0.6%. And in milligrams, so to what extent does that exceed the value in the contaminants ordinance? If I'm not mistaken, it's 5,000 milligrams per kilogram. So we are far, far away from what is stated in the contaminants ordinance. Fabiano, we know that in certain legalized markets like Canada and the US, there are edibles that are available with a high THC content, and nobody has died from that. So are these values really too low, or are there efforts to change that? And what would be required to achieve such changes in the contaminants ordinance? Well, these are historical values. They come from a time that is long past. And internally at the Federal Food Safety Office, we know that these values are no longer really in line with the market, the choice of products that you have these days. And it is necessary to revise these laws, not only when it comes to THC, but specifically when it comes to THC, of course. But in order to be able to change these values, you need studies. trials. So I'm not in charge of this ordinance. I'm just a scientist. But I am sure that based on an authorization that you can submit or trial studies that you could submit, these values might be adapted. Does anybody here in the panel know what such a study would look like? What you'd need to do these toxicological studies? What does that mean? Well, at first you need animal trials. That's the beginning. And in a second step, human exposition. And for the IR study, that would be 200 participants. That's a statistically rather low subject number. Isn't that too low to make statistically relevant statements? I'm not a scientist, but had to study statistics in my MBA. Well, I am not a scientist for the study design, but I have heard that in the past they had planned 400 and then they found that 200 would also be okay. Miguel, do you agree? What would you say about 200 participants? I can't really comment on that. Okay. But you are making efforts, but timing-wise, I mean, how far have you come? Well, it's going to take at least 2 more years. So that will be a long time. So mid-end 2023, something might come up. Is there a faster way to do that? Maybe not in the EU, but in Switzerland? Well, we have the same safety requirements as the EU when it comes to authorization. So you also need to submit studies in Switzerland, except if you have certain reasons justifying that you can do without that. And at the moment, respective authorizations are not really granted a lot. So I can imagine that the deadline or the timeline in Switzerland will be similar, except if somebody in Switzerland is already doing such studies. And when it comes to the CBD isolate, it will be faster because there we already have certain studies and we already have authorized medication in the field, and all the findings that you need are already there. You only need to reevaluate them. So there it might be faster. So it all takes a rather long time, right? And I am convinced that the participants here, producers, who, if you pragmatically see it, call in question this long transition period. And do we really need all these studies to have these legal amendments? We know that tobacco replacement products already now have a THC content of up to 1% in Switzerland, and they are not forbidden narcotics. They get inhaled, smoked, and there you also take up cannabinoids into your organism via the lung. So isn't that absurd, Miguel? Yes, I agree. So that's really double standards. So there are product classes that get consumed these days where all these cannabinoids are not called in questions. Apart from tobacco replacement products, we can also mention the official prescriptions that you can get from the pharmacies, so oils, THC oils, CBD oils. So it is really questionable why you have to do so much for food stuff. But on the other hand, the quality requirements for food are maybe a bit higher when it comes to tobacco replacement products, but nevertheless, I mean, you could maybe refer to the fact that nobody has died from cannabis. So this is not a scientific statement. It is just an experience value. And isn't that an important experience value, just to understand that? So shouldn't that also be taken into account when it comes to a pragmatic decision? Well, of course, it is a factor that is not taken into account these days, but certain foods do not need authorization because they have a safe history of use. Now you can argue about that. What does that mean? The Novel Food Ordinance has just set a date. And you can argue whether that makes sense or not. At some point, it will have to be amended because in 20 years' time, this date will no longer really be relevant, especially if more and more such products get launched. But what is also important, food, and this has been said already, have the highest safety standards when it comes to consumer protection. And from a scientific point of view, it's the absorption via the gut, via the stomach that plays a major role. What amounts are taken up? Is it already being absorbed in the mouth or only in the stomach or the gut? Here, important safety questions play a role and make sure that you need high standards for foods. And there are some studies that have already been conducted in the pharmaceutical area, but there risks and benefits are weighed differently than in foods. With food, the risk factor is 0. And that's a killer factor, you could say, from time to time. Of course, yes, but in Switzerland, we also have alcohol laws, we have tobacco laws, and you know that these substances have a toxic effect. So we are still far away from having a pragmatic, scientifically based solution. I can add something here. Darf ich?
Ich kann da noch was zu ergänzen.
Can I say something?
Ja, schön.
Sehr gerne, Francis.
Yeah.
Auf jeden Fall.
Yeah, Daniel and Fabiano. I lived through the time when the novel foods legislation was set up in 1997, and I was working in a food ingredient company at that time, making flavors and food ingredients. Mm-hmm. And then I switched, and I was working for Nestle, and we were confronted by all the challenges around that. But when you think about safety, I mean, the first thing that's most important for everybody, every stakeholder, is the protection of public health. That's the number one, and that's non-negotiable. But the concept of safety is really based on 2 principles. The first principle is that zero risk doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So you can't say zero risk. It's not possible to do it. What's required is that the operators, they do what's reasonably required to ensure the safety, right? The second condition, or the second principle, is that the food or the food ingredient that's consumed, it's consumed within the context of its dietary pattern. If it's going to be in how many milligrams per day, what's the total consumption rate a day, this has to be understood as well. So when you think about safety, you have to consider those two key principles, and then you can come forward with maybe a more pragmatic way to deal with the situation. I have to applaud the FSA in the UK because they are faced with their market, which is full of hundreds and hundreds of CBD products. If you walk down any high street in London or Leeds or Manchester, you see dozens of food products, dozens of cosmetics, but for food we're talking about. And so they said, well, if an operator was active on the market before, February or March last year, 2020, and you applied for the novel foods authorization with the FSA, you could continue to commercialize your product. So that's great for me from the point of view of an operator. I can sell my chocolate, right? Why doesn't Switzerland take this kind of stance? Because we're operating in this gray zone, and we all agree that CBD is not harmful for health per se, right? And if it's in the dosages that are commonly found, like 50 milligrams or 100 milligrams per unit, there is no risk for safety, right? You agree, right? I'm being a bit provocative towards you, yeah? because Switzerland, I think...
Just for the record, we're not... Well, maybe you might be quoted, but the idea is not to put you on the hot seat here, okay? Just to make
No. But for me, you see, I think Switzerland could take a lead.
Yeah.
It could really take a lead, and take advantage of the current situation since the Cannavape case last November, when the highest court in the EU decided that CBD is not a narcotic, that it's against the principles of free trade within countries in the EU. So now France is revising its regulations. The Czech Republic is selling food products with CBD. Portugal is doing things as well. It's sort of like a fragmented environment, yeah? So out of this chaos that's going on, why doesn't Switzerland show the way? That's what I think.
Here, I need to add, Francis, what I need to add here, Francis, is that, of course, this could be a role model, what the FSA is doing in the UK, but the problem is that so far as I know, very few of these applications have been validated. And the validation is the first step so that you can go forward. So very few have been able to take this first hurdle. And it must be expected that a major part of the products is thrown out from the shelves again. Or do you have further information on that? What's your take on that?
No, the situation in the UK is that they gave a cut-off date at the end of March, right, for companies to submit their applications. The procedure was that the FSA would then publish on their website the companies and the products that have been submitted and that their applications were accepted. So when you say validated, it's only the first step, which is basically they look at the dossier and they say, if everything is in there and is complete, okay, we accept the dossier for evaluation. The evaluation process is going to take another year, right? But in the meantime, if you already have your dossier validated, then you can continue. Mm-hmm. But then, guess what? The FSA found themselves in a little bit of a difficult position, because publishing on their website that certain companies had their dossiers validated and maybe others not is sort of, from a legal point of view, is causing a little problems for them. Yeah, so I think they didn't continue their process because they stopped publishing on their website in April 24th, I think, the list of all the companies that they were accepting for validated dossiers, right? Because they found themselves confronted by this. So I know they have about 800 applications in total. You're right. Many were rejected initially at the very beginning stage, but there are hundreds that are being processed now.
And the companies that were not validated, can they make a second attempt, or was it just a cut-off and that was it?
I don't know. That's a bit of the situation. They don't know. I think it all boils down to the dialogue that the company is having with the authorities. Yeah. But the authorities are overwhelmed in the UK. Mm-hmm. They're totally overwhelmed.
And Kai? I just wanted to add something on the safe use. The Novel Food Catalogue states itself that there are two alternatives on the market before 1997. And there they have strange requirements, so I have to bring sales lists from before 1997, which companies usually don't have. They have destroyed these already. But there's a second alternative, and that is the safe use after 1997. And if we look at, I have a client who started in 2015. They exported bulk extracts to the US. You were allowed to sell them but not produce them. And then the CBD boom started in 2015. Then look at 2018, Germany, the drugstores there. Hundreds of thousands, millions of units have been sold already in Germany and Europe worldwide. And if you reasonably compile these figures, and that's going to be the next big project of IHA, then, and the German courts will say that, you haven't proven the safe use, so the sales ban is valid. But if you come with good figures and show them how many units have actually been sold already, that will be a good argument. We know the administrative courts have dealt with that, but this argument of the safe use is one that we can bring in. And in my opinion, it will be well worth doing that. Is that being done by the association already? What's the timing there? Well, this is an organizational thing at the moment because you really need to ask all the member companies for data, and then you need to consider how to compile the figures, but we're working on that. Okay, now I'd like to ask the producers too. Lukas, this ban of CBD in foodstuff, what effect does that have on your everyday life as an entrepreneur, as a representative of your company? Well, it makes trade difficult, definitely, and it leads to recalls by the cantonal enforcement authorities. So many CBD products are taken off the shelves because of the ordinances, not only because THC but CBD thresholds, which we calculated before, are 5,000, 6,000 times exceeded. And the authorities argue with this health risk because of these high THC concentrations. But for us, it is always important to have an exchange with the authorities to know what is possible, what is not. And for us, it's also clear that if a foodstuff is not accepted, we need to use cosmetics law, chemicals declaration, where we have the relevant processes to show that the products are marketable. But that's a difficult task to consistently do that. And legal uncertainty is high. And may I ask you, are you also part of the consortium of EA? Well, we used to be. At the moment, we're not. May I ask you, why not? Why you withdrew from that consortium? Well, that was for different reasons. We support EA's work completely. That is extremely important political work that they do also for the future. But for us, it was a personal business decision and also the belief in the project regarding THC that it's going to take much longer than these 2 to 3 years that they plan with. And in the long run, we currently can't imagine that cannabis products in foodstuff might really be allowed. Maybe with a new legislation that would be possible, but no, currently we don't see that. Okay, and this is also about the economic survival of a company, of course. And in marketing, we all know that if you say that you can take these CBD oils, administer them, and now you need to make a switch. Well, that's exactly not possible. You need to correctly market these products, and that's quite a lot of work, requires a lot of exchange between the marketing department and the authorities, and it's so difficult to understand that. I see that in my everyday life a lot. You need to explain it so many times that you cannot make dosage recommendations on a product in these cases. So it's like you're racing against the time. On the one hand, we know from other markets that edibles have become established and that they seem to be safe. And on the other hand, we have the current regulation, which is based on obsolete principles to some extent. How do you bridge this gap? Fabiano, what are alternatives also when it comes to food law? How can these products be legally marketed so that a company like Grünkraft or other companies don't go bankrupt? Well, first of all, I wanted to say something else. I mean, there are complex labeling requirements and regulatory requirements. And today we are talking about CBD, THC, but these hold true for all products. So we are not fighting a war against CBD. No, these requirements also hold true for other products. And now regarding the question, how can you still be active in the market? It's important what the purpose is. Food has a clear definition in food law. When it comes to food law, when you launch a product, you need to decide, how do I want to launch it? And of course, there are possibilities if it is a cosmetic product, a chemical, or whatever else, a pharmaceutical. The question is, what requirements do I need to meet that I comply with the law? So every category has its requirements. These are different, and they are all based on a definition. It depends on how does it get absorbed. And of course, sometimes there are contradictions behind these principles, of course. But that's really a question. It's a simple question of purpose. Of course, you can say, I don't like that, but these are the requirements. And as a food, you need authorization or you need a change of the law, which is currently, however, not planned. Okay, but there are also other possibilities to bring these products to market. It depends on the purpose of use, and then as a producer, you need to consistently communicate or not. So you also have the possibility to do something via the Chemicals Act, but specifically under the food law, you could choose to market your product as a cosmetics product or as a utility product. What possibilities do you currently have? Well, all these possibilities exist already and are being used. So we are not in charge of enforcement. And in Switzerland, we have a system which says that there is some bridging between the authorities and the consumers, and there are the enforcement authorities in between. We are in constant communication. We are trying to coordinate the enforcement, but with the system that we have in Switzerland, it is not really our task. And of course, the purpose needs to be considered, but you also need to look at the whole. You can launch a product as a chemical, but if on the other hand, later on, you say take 50 droplets of that, then the question is, I mean, if I go to a lab, I would have never taken such a product. And then the question is it still a chemical or not? Or if it is a cosmetic product, how do you tell consumers to use it if you don't give them any recommendations? Well, or if it just says CBD or whatever, then the question is, what instructions for use do you get, orally or in writing? And what does the consumer think, how to use it? And this is a gray area, really. And what is important for us is that we try to make sure that the enforcement authorities act the same way everywhere. This is, of course, something that we attach great importance to. And against this backdrop, the Association of Cantonal Chemists has started a campaign. We've seen many recalls of CBD oils recently, and industry is now starting a dialogue with this association, joining forces with them, because it doesn't help to establish more legal certainty or planning certainty if you remain in this gray area. So if it's just about how to circumvent regulation, this is not really something that leads you very far. But as you said, there are legitimate ways to bring to market these products with a different purpose. But if a product was previously declared to be a foodstuff, there's no reason why it couldn't be launched as a cosmetics product. So the fact that you previously promoted this product as a food doesn't mean that later on you cannot legally promote a product as a cosmetics product. We as a law firm are really establishing this dialogue now to make sure you can do that. Now a question on synthetic CBD, which is also on the novel food list. Miguel, synthetic cannabinoids. I repeatedly hear that this is the same molecular system as natural cannabinoids. Is that really true from a chemist's point of view? Oh, I'd be cautious there. First of all, you need to clearly differentiate. This has nothing to do with the spice. This is really... Oh, can you explain that? Can you explain to the audience what that is? There's a lot of confusion in the market. What are synthetic cannabinoids? You hear about these flowers, their spice and synthetics. Well, some are called synthetic cannabinoids, but they are actually mimetics only. So the molecular structure has nothing to do with cannabinoids, but they bind to the same receptors. And unfortunately, they are also administered the same way. So they are smoked as weed. But this is not what we are talking about. We are talking about synthetically produced THC and CBD. And that this is exactly the same as what a plant produces is a claim that is hard to prove. There are different stereoisomers of these products. That stereoisomers, this is in the chemical formula, these different tips. Well, it's difficult to explain here if I can't explain it visually. So what back in the 1950s happened with Contagan? With Contagan, there was one stereoisomer was effective against headaches, and the other one led to crippled children. And the problem with stereoisomers is that you never really know what is going to happen with it. A plant can only produce one type of molecules, and will always do so. However, if you produce something synthetically, you usually have a mix of such stereoisomers. So these agnostics towards synthetics and naturally produced or derived cannabinoids is not scientifically based. Yes, I'd be cautious there. I'd be cautious when it comes to synthetically produced materials. And in addition to that, these labs that produce that, at least today, are not necessarily pharmaceuticals labs. So they don't pay so much attention on how the processing is done, and after synthesis, the products, are they really cleaned? Currently with Delta-8 in the US, this is a huge problem. A lot of Delta-8 vapes are sold where there's no Delta-8 in it. Sorry, I didn't get that. Yes, to some extent there's no Delta-8 in there, or it's just a big mix of side products in there because no clean processing is done, because it is not a pharmaceutical lab that produces that. And that's why I personally am not a big fan of such synthetic production labs. So you should really go via the plant, extract, and then you have unchanged molecules. But for this you need further studies, scientifically based studies. But what happened there in the 1950s? I didn't quite get it. Contagan. Did you never hear about that? Sure, I did. It's an entirely different study thing. Has nothing to do with cannabis. But the stereoisomers there, it backfired really. And the pharma industry made a big mistake. So Maximilian has given me a sign already that I should wrap the discussion up. So we would like to give the opportunity to the audience now to ask questions, and Maximilian's going to moderate that round of questions. Yes, because the interpreters will at some point get tired, so we need to wrap up at some point. So if you ask a question, please give us your name and tell us who specifically you're targeting your question to. Roberto von Emma Kodalev. Wir sind eines dieser Unternehmen, die ein validiertes Dossier haben in Großbritannien. Und die Schweiz folgt der Europa bisher, wenn es um die Novel Foods geht. Was passiert denn, wenn Großbritannien zum Beispiel vollkommen validierte Dossiers hat? Werden diese Produkte dann auch in der Schweiz verkauft werden können? Wir wissen ja, dass die Schweiz bestimmte Verträge mit einzelnen Ländern hat. Wir diskutieren das, weil das this is also a challenge for us to find out how that's going to work. So currently, they have rather similar requirements as the Novel Food Ordinance. They have taken over lots of these safety relevant questions. And the idea is not that the UK will be seen as a third country. No, we basically want to be a little more open-minded towards what they do, but it's not clear yet. So a special relationship as with the EU. So there might be the possibility to make it possible that validated products in England can be also directly marketed in Switzerland. That is something that's conceivable, yes. Good news. So I think we've answered that question. Further questions? My name is Marco Hoffmann. I am the CEO of Swissgate AG, and we focus on skin and hair care with CBD and these recall campaigns. You said that the cantonal laboratories would do that and coordinate that, but you need to make sure that the same happens on a federal level. As far as I know, a lot of recalls happened in the canton of Zurich, but if I go to a drugstore or a pharmacy, I can still buy CBD oils. So why are there do you see these differences in the market? Well, you need to take into account that CBD is in some foods, but the authorities, they check many different things, but they also stretch their limits. And that's what I hear, at least. And what you also mentioned is that there are differences between the cantonal enforcement authorities, and this is always a problem in Switzerland, not only when it comes to food. So federalism is to blame for this mess. So every canton does its own thing. Yes, that's true. And we have very different cultures in the individual cantons, also when it comes to enforcement. And the cantons have some freedom when it comes to enforcement. CBD is a gray area here. And we try to have an exchange. Industry tries to have an exchange. And this way we try to harmonize as much as possible. And if you still find products in the market, then this is based on, well, self-control, I'd say. I mean, you can launch a product in the market. You do not need to ask us if you're sure that you have done everything right. But it might backfire. And there are so many products in the market that the authorities can't check it all. But we are aware that this situation is not satisfactory. Well, maybe I can add here that it's certainly federalism that's making things harder. But on the other hand, it is also the authorities, the cantonal chemists, the cantonal pharmacists. You have some competence conflicts, I would say. And if it is being sold in a pharmacy, it's often not clear. Is that now the competence of the food safety agent or the cantonal pharmacist, and then certain things get checked, others don't get checked, and this leads to unequal treatment, yes? And this is also some demand that we make as an industry, that we would like to have uniform standards in enforcement so that everyone has the same opportunities. And the lobbying group IG Hanf is doing a lot here, especially when it comes to discussing with the Association of Cantonal Chemists. But it's a challenge, yes. So I think we have answered this question. Further questions over there in the back? Robin von Formula Swiss. Ich habe den ganzen Prozess durchgemacht mit dem Konsortium. Wir hatten 360 Produkte mit Labels in unterschiedlichen Sprachen. Also 45 Seiten jeweils. Man darf das nicht selbst machen. Man muss also Drittparteien dazu bezahlen. Dann muss man Labortests machen auf der Haut mit 50 Personen pro Produkt in Deutschland. Wir haben das meiste davon durchgeführt. Wir haben 6.000 Artikel auf der Webseite gestrichen. Wir mussten dann Labels drucken und so weiter in 12 Sprachen. Und in Zug gibt es 28 Läden, wo man noch verschiedenste Sachen kaufen kann, Bonbons und so weiter. Also, aber meine Frage ist eigentlich, ist es möglich, dass man ein Produkt als Kosmetikprodukt registrieren kann? Und gibt es da irgendwelche Empfehlungen dazu? Kann man irgendwelche Empfehlungen machen, wie viel man nutzen muss? Also wir arbeiten da mit Unternehmen für die Compliance zusammen und wir sprechen hier über Investitionen von nahezu 10 Millionen. Und das möchten wir nicht in der Schweiz einfach so versenken, indem wir hier Empfehlungen abgeben für CBD, die nicht gerechtfertigt sind gemäß Gesetz. Well, I think that this is probably a question for Fabiano. Well, I didn't really understand the exact question. Could somebody please repeat that? Well, I think the question was whether you could launch a cosmetics product with instructions to use the product, right? Well, the cosmetics ordinance says that cosmetics are not food. It is a utility rather, and they're the requirements, the new requirements that have been in place for a year now. This security profile, something needs to be adhered to. So you can market a cosmetics product if the requirements are met. And it's clear that this is a lot of work. I mean, it's a tedious process. I know that. I am mainly active in the food sector, so I don't know exactly with cosmetics as from what level you need these PIFs, whether there are any way around that. But maybe we can have a direct chat on that later on, so I can give you the contact of the right person who could answer that question. Yes, and there is an ordinance for cosmetics which rather clearly states which kind of marketing can be done for the product and which not. So to answer your question, yes, it's possible. But with cosmetics, other questions need to be asked. For instance, what can you use as ingredients for cosmetics? That is something that people argue about. As far as I know, CBD cosmetics are still something that the authorities don't like because their argument is that in Switzerland they do not have sufficient data yet on the effect of CBD, and that's why no company in Switzerland can really guarantee the required self-control. So that's a difficult argument. Well, this is what certain cantonal chemists say, yes, but there we have cantonal differences, and from our legal perspective, it is still possible. But yes, no guarantee. Further questions from the audience? My name is Marco Kuhn. I am the owner of the Hanf deposit store. I've got a question regarding animal food. in the field of animal food, we also have products containing CBD, and I have heard that the EU intends to prohibit that too. As with human food, they'd like to declare that novel food for animals. Is that true? Do you have any information on that? Yes. Yes, some people are of the opinion that CBD as an extract, as a droplet, is a supplement to feed which requires special authorization, and that's regulated in the European ordinances on animal food. And IHA intends to do something there once the toxicological studies that we've talked about have been completed. They also want to make applications there. That's a feed material register in the EU, and there, for the time being, they still allow the cold-pressed products, leaves, flowers, seeds. You can press that, get an oil out of that, and this is still allowed, and for the time being, they will continue to allow that. Okay, but I know in Switzerland, for livestock, you have the problem with THC in dairy cows, goats, sheep. And the CBD ban that the EU intends to issue, does it also true for pets or only for livestock? Well, that is also differentiated, of course, pets and livestock. If it is for meat production, for instance, but there will be no ban imposed. You just need market authorization for extracted CBD oils for pets. Okay, we've got time for one more question from the audience. Who else would like to ask a question? Emil Farman, Connection Capital aus London. CBD ist vielleicht ein neuartiges Lebensmittel, aber Hanf ist es nicht. Hanf hat eine lange Geschichte. In der Anwendung auch. In China vor 10.000 Jahren hat Mao schon in einem Piktogramm wurde er gezeigt, wie er Hanf aufnimmt, oder in Höhlen in der Ukraine oder Schamane in Peru. Die haben schon die Inhalte analysiert. Also es gibt 6.000 Jahre Geschichte der menschlichen Nutzung von Hanf, und die Behörden heute lassen sich davon nicht leiten. Well, we always talk about novel food permits, but you can also, of course, call in question the categorization. And the novel food catalog is not legally binding. It's close to being legally binding, but it's not officially legally binding. And we're talking about CBD extracts here. I mean, with a plant, and so it's true for all plants, you cannot just transfer the novel food status for any part of the plant. I mean, for certain hemp parts, this is not novel food. For instance, herbal tea, this is not a novel food if it is made with the leaves. So you can challenge certain decisions. You can try to bring proof. And so far, no evidence has been brought that would have brought our authority to recategorize certain plants or plant parts.